The familiar aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the cozy bakery, a comforting scent that had greeted me every morning since childhood. As I stepped behind the counter to help my father, Jack, prepare for the day's rush, a pang of nostalgia tugged at my heart. This bakery, a cherished legacy passed down through generations, was more than just a business. It was a sanctuary, a place where the warmth of community and family intertwined. "Morning, sweetheart." Dad greeted me with a warm smile, his hands already dusted with flour from the early morning baking. "Ready for another busy day?" I nodded, tying my apron strings. "You know I am. The Harris Bakery wouldn't be the same without us." Dad chuckled, his eyes crinkling with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Linda. She poured her heart into this place, and now it's our turn to keep her spirit alive." Memories of Mom's infectious laughter and her unwavering dedication to the bakery flooded my mind. Even after she passed away when I was just a teenager, her presence lingered in every nook and cranny, a constant reminder of the love and hard work that built this sanctuary. As the morning rush began, a steady stream of familiar faces filled the bakery, each greeted with a warm smile and a heartfelt exchange. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow from down the street, beamed as I handed her a freshly baked blueberry muffin, her favorite. Little Timmy, the rambunctious kid from the neighborhood, bounced excitedly as Dad slipped him an extra chocolate chip cookie, winking conspiratorially. These were the moments that made every early morning and late night worth it. The connections forged, the sense of belonging that transcended mere transactions. In a world that often felt cold and impersonal, our little bakery was a haven, a place where people could find solace in the simple pleasures of life. As the day wore on, my thoughts drifted to Mark, my husband of 2 years. We had met at the office where we both worked, and from the moment our eyes locked, I knew there was something special between us. His kind eyes and gentle demeanor had captured my heart, and I couldn't help but imagine a future filled with love and laughter by his side. Yet, even in the midst of our blissful union, a shadow loomed, the ever-present specter of Mark's mother, Evelyn. A woman of wealth and social standing, she had never approved of my humble roots or the bakery that meant so much to me. Her cutting remarks and disapproving glances had become a constant source of tension, driving a wedge between Mark and me. "Linda, if you truly loved me, you'd stand up to her." Mark's voice echoed in my mind, choked with frustration, his eyes pleading while my heart trembled between loyalty to my husband and fear of his mother's wrath. As the day drew to a close, and the last customer left with a warm pastry and a grateful smile, I found myself torn between the sanctuary of the bakery and the turmoil brewing in my personal life. But one thing was certain. I would not let Evelyn's disdain diminish the legacy my parents had built or the love that Mark and I shared. With a deep breath, I steeled my resolve, determined to find a way to bridge the divide and protect the things that mattered most. The sound of Evelyn's heels clicking against the hardwood floor announced her arrival before I even saw her. Mark tensed beside me, his hand gripping mine a little tighter as his mother swept into the living room, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress a stark contrast to our modest home. "Linda, darling." Evelyn greeted me with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you're not planning on wearing something so plain for the wedding." I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar prickle of insecurity creep up my spine. "It's just a simple ceremony, Evelyn, nothing too extravagant." Her perfectly arched eyebrow raised ever so slightly, and I could practically hear the disdain dripping from her words. "Surely you don't expect my son to settle for a backyard affair. This is a Bryant wedding, after all." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me, but before he could speak, Evelyn continued, "I've taken the liberty of booking the country club for the reception. It's a venue befitting our family's stature." My heart sank as I realized she had once again steamrolled over our plans, imposing her vision without regard for our wishes. Mark remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, and I knew he wouldn't challenge his mother's decision. Evelyn's critical eye swept over our modest living room, her nose wrinkling ever so slightly. "I must say, Linda, I had hoped my son would have chosen a more suitable partner, one who could appreciate the finer things in life." Her words cut deep, striking at the very core of my insecurities. I had always taken pride in my humble upbringing and the values instilled by my father's bakery: hard work, community, and a deep appreciation for the simple pleasures in life. But in Evelyn's world, those virtues held no value. "Mother, that's enough." Mark finally spoke up, his voice strained, but Evelyn merely waved him off, her attention already shifting to the next item on her agenda. As she droned on about guest lists and seating arrangements, I felt myself retreating inward, my confidence withering under the weight of her constant criticism. Mark's hand remained limp in mine, a silent acknowledgement of his inability, or unwillingness, to stand up to his mother's overbearing presence. Later that evening, as Mark and I prepared for bed, the tension between us was palpable. I could see the conflict etched on his face, the struggle between his love for me and his deep-rooted fear of defying his mother's wishes. "Linda," he began, his voice heavy with resignation, "I know my mother can be difficult, but she means well in her own way." I fought back the bitter laugh that threatened to escape my lips. Evelyn's actions spoke louder than any well-intentioned words ever could. Her constant belittling, her disregard for our desires, and her relentless pursuit of social status had cast a dark shadow over what should have been one of the happiest times of our lives. "Does she, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained frustration. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like she's more concerned with appearances than our happiness." Mark's shoulders slumped, and I could see the internal battle raging within him. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much he loved me, a part of him would always be tethered to his mother's expectations, her approval a coveted prize he could never quite attain. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a seed of resentment took root within me. Evelyn's constant undermining had not only threatened my self-worth, but had also driven a wedge between Mark and me. I knew then that I couldn't simply stand by and let her dictate the course of our lives. For the sake of our marriage and my own sense of dignity, I would have to find a way to confront her toxic influence, even if it meant risking the wrath of the formidable Evelyn Bryant. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, and I knew without even answering that it was Evelyn, her perfectly manicured nails rapping impatiently against the doorframe. Mark shot me an apologetic glance as he rose to greet his mother, his shoulders already tensing in anticipation of her critique. "Linda, darling," Evelyn breezed in, her gaze sweeping over our modest living room with thinly veiled disdain. "I simply had to come by and discuss the guest list for the wedding." Before I could respond, she thrust a thick binder into my hands, the pages overflowing with names and addresses. "I've taken the liberty of inviting a few of my dearest friends and associates. After all, this is a Bryant wedding, and we must maintain a certain level of decorum." My heart sank as I flipped through the pages, recognizing none of the names, a veritable who's who of Evelyn's elite social circle. Gone was any semblance of the intimate gathering Mark and I had envisioned, replaced by a grandiose affair designed to showcase Evelyn's status and connections. "Evelyn, I appreciate your input, but Mark and I had hoped for something a bit more personal," I began, my voice wavering slightly under her steely gaze. "Nonsense, dear," she waved her hand dismissively. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We simply must do it properly." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me, his silence a deafening testament to his unwillingness to challenge his mother's authority. I could feel the frustration building within me, a simmering resentment at the way Evelyn steamrolled over our wishes, treating our wedding as a mere extension of her own social ambitions. "But what about my family and friends?" I pressed on, my voice growing stronger. "Shouldn't they be included as well?" Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched ever so slightly, and I could practically hear the disdain dripping from her words. "Surely you don't expect to invite those common folk to such an esteemed occasion." The insult stung like a slap in the face, and I felt Mark tense beside me, his jaw clenching as he struggled to find the words to defend me. But before he could speak, Evelyn continued, her tone laced with condescension. "Darling, I'm only trying to ensure that this wedding reflects the Bryant family's standing in society. We can't have your little bakery friends cluttering up the guest list, now can we?" The air seemed to crackle with tension as her words hung between us, and I could feel the anger bubbling up within me, threatening to boil over. How dare she dismiss the very people who had been my rock, my support system, throughout my life? The loyal customers and cherished friends who had celebrated my triumphs and comforted me in my darkest moments, reduced to mere clutter in Evelyn's eyes. "That's enough, Mother," Mark finally spoke up, his voice strained but resolute. "Linda's family and friends are just as important as yours. This is our wedding, and we'll invite whoever we choose." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her perfectly painted lips pursing in disapproval. "Mark, darling, you can't be serious. These people are beneath us, and their presence will only serve to diminish the grandeur of the occasion." The words hung in the air like a slap, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Mark as he struggled to maintain his composure. In that moment, I realized the true depth of Evelyn's disdain, not just for me, but for everything and everyone that didn't conform to her elitist ideals. As Evelyn continued to prattle on about seating arrangements and floral arrangements, her voice droning on like a persistent buzz, I felt a newfound resolve taking root within me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, a celebration of love and commitment, but Evelyn had twisted it into a twisted display of social climbing and one-upmanship. I would not stand idly by and let her trample over our dreams, our values, any longer. If Mark couldn't find the strength to stand up to his mother, then I would have to take matters into my own hands. The seeds of a plan began to germinate in my mind, a silent vow to reclaim our wedding and our lives from Evelyn's toxic grip. The familiar chime of the bakery's bell greeted me as I stepped inside, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread instantly calming my frayed nerves. As I made my way behind the counter, exchanging warm greetings with the regulars, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. This was my sanctuary, a place where Evelyn's toxic influence held no sway. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Dad's voice broke through my reverie, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem a bit distracted today." I forced a smile, not wanting to burden him with the weight of my troubles. "Just wedding stress," I replied, hoping the half-truth would suffice. Dad's expression softened, and he reached out to give my hand a gentle squeeze. "Don't let that woman get you down, Linda. This is supposed to be a happy time for you and Mark." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. If only he knew the extent of Evelyn's meddling, her relentless efforts to mold our wedding into a gaudy display of her own social standing. As the day wore on, and the familiar faces of our loyal customers streamed in and out, I found myself seeking solace in their warm smiles and friendly banter. These were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had been there for me through thick and thin, long before Evelyn's toxic presence had entered our lives. It was then that a seed of an idea began to take root in my mind. If Evelyn was determined to turn our wedding into a spectacle for her elite social circle, then perhaps it was time to remind her of the true power of community, the unbreakable bonds forged through shared experiences and unwavering support. That evening, as I closed up the bakery, I made a series of discreet phone calls, reaching out to those I knew I could trust implicitly. One by one, they agreed to meet me in secret, their voices brimming with concern and a shared determination to stand by my side. The following night, I found myself in the cozy living room of Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who had been a fixture at the bakery for as long as I could remember. Around me sat a small but formidable group, fellow customers, neighbors, and friends who had become like family over the years. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and resolve. "As you know, Evelyn has been difficult, to say the least, when it comes to the wedding plans." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and I could see the shared frustration etched on their faces. They had all borne witness to Evelyn's disdain, her dismissive attitude toward the very community that had nurtured and supported me throughout my life. "She wants to turn our wedding into a gaudy display of wealth and status," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "But I won't let her diminish the love and support that you've all shown me over the years." Mrs. Thompson reached out and patted my hand, her eyes shining with determination. "We're with you, dear," she assured me. "That woman doesn't know the first thing about true family and community." One by one, they pledged their support, offering ideas and strategies to counter Evelyn's elitist machinations. From securing a prime location for the ceremony to rallying the local businesses to provide their services, a plan began to take shape. A plan to remind Evelyn that true strength lies not in wealth or social standing, but in the unbreakable bonds of community. As the meeting drew to a close, and I looked around at the faces of those who had become my chosen family, I felt a newfound sense of resolve. Evelyn might wield her wealth and influence like a weapon, but she had underestimated the power of genuine love and loyalty. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was determined to emerge victorious, not just for myself, but for the enduring spirit of community that had sustained me through every challenge life had thrown my way. The sound of Evelyn's shrill voice cut through the air like a knife, shattering the tentative peace that had settled over our weekly family dinner. "Honestly, Linda, must you insist on serving such pedestrian fare? One would think you'd have learned a thing or two about proper hosting by now." I felt the familiar sting of her words, the disdain dripping from every syllable as she eyed the simple spread of homemade dishes before her. Dad's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table, but before he could respond, Evelyn continued her tirade. "And this bakery," she sneered, her gaze sweeping over the quaint decor that had once filled me with such pride. "Surely you don't expect my son to be associated with such a common establishment." The air seemed to crackle with tension, and I could feel Mark's discomfort radiating from beside me. He opened his mouth as if to defend me, but the words never came, a silent testament to the hold his mother still had over him. "That's enough, Evelyn," Dad's voice boomed, startling us all with its sudden ferocity. "This bakery has been a cornerstone of our community for generations, and I'll not have you disrespect it, or my daughter, under my own roof." Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in surprise, her lips pursing into a thin line of disapproval. "Jack, darling, I'm merely trying to help Linda understand the expectations that come with being part of our family. Surely you can see how her humble beginnings might be a liability." The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Dad's every pore. This was more than just a petty insult. It was a direct attack on the very values and traditions that had sustained our family for generations. "A liability?" Dad's voice trembled with barely contained fury. "The only liability here is your complete lack of respect and decency. Linda is a kind, hard-working woman who embodies the true spirit of family and community, something you clearly know nothing about." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop in a display of barely restrained irritation. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner? I am merely trying to guide Linda toward a more refined way of life." "Refined?" Dad scoffed, his laughter tinged with bitterness. "You call belittling and demeaning others refined? Your idea of refinement is nothing more than a hollow facade, a desperate attempt to cling to a false sense of superiority." The words seemed to hang in the air, a palpable silence descending over the room as Evelyn's face flushed with indignation. For a moment I thought she might storm out, her pride too wounded to endure such a scathing rebuke. But then her expression hardened and she turned her icy gaze towards me. "Linda, darling, surely you don't agree with this outburst." Her voice was sickly sweet, laced with a subtle threat. "You know how important it is to maintain a certain level of decorum, especially with our upcoming nuptials." I felt the weight of her expectation pressing down on me, the unspoken demand that I choose between my father and the woman who would soon be my mother-in-law. But as I looked into Dad's eyes, shining with a fierce determination to protect me, I knew there was no choice to be made. "Evelyn," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. "This bakery, this community, is a part of who I am, and if you can't respect that, then perhaps it's time you reevaluated your priorities." The words seemed to hang in the air, a silent challenge to the woman who had made it her mission to undermine and belittle everything I held dear. And in that moment, as Evelyn's face contorted with barely contained rage, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. A silent vow to reclaim my dignity and protect the legacy that had sustained my family for generations. As the evening drew to a close and Evelyn swept out in a flurry of indignation, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The seeds of revenge had taken root. A quiet determination to turn the tables on the woman who had tried so desperately to break me. And with the unwavering support of my father and my community, I knew that victory was within reach. The morning of our wedding dawned with a palpable tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. As I slipped into my simple yet elegant gown, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation mingling with the excitement. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, a celebration of love and commitment, but Evelyn's looming presence cast a dark shadow over the proceedings. As I stepped out of the bridal suite, I was greeted by a flurry of activity. Evelyn's elite friends milling about, their designer dresses and expensive jewelry a stark contrast to the warm, familiar faces of my own community. It was as if two worlds had collided, and I found myself caught in the middle, torn between the opulence Evelyn craved and the genuine love and support that had sustained me throughout my life. "Linda, darling, you look absolutely radiant," Evelyn gushed, sweeping over to me with a forced smile plastered on her perfectly made-up face. "Although perhaps we could have done something a bit more elaborate with your hair." I fought back the urge to roll my eyes, reminding myself that today was about more than just appeasing Evelyn's whims. This was my day, our day, and I would not let her dampen the joy and significance of the occasion. As the ceremony began, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, bolstered by the presence of my father and the familiar faces of our loyal customers and friends. These were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had been there for me through thick and thin, long before Evelyn's toxic influence had entered our lives. And then, as if sensing my newfound resolve, Dad took the stage, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and determination. "Friends, family, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two remarkable individuals," he began, his voice ringing out with a clarity and strength that belied his years. "But more than that, we are here to honor the enduring spirit of community, the bonds that transcend mere bloodlines and social status, forged through shared experiences, unwavering support, and a deep appreciation for the simple joys in life." I could see Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knit together in confusion, her lips pursing ever so slightly as Dad's words washed over her like a gentle rebuke. "Linda and Mark have chosen to embark on this journey together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in a legacy that stretches back generations," Dad continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "A legacy built on the values of hard work, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to those who truly matter, the people who have stood by their side through good times and bad." As Dad's speech reached its crescendo, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude swell within me. This was more than just a wedding ceremony. It was a defiant declaration of the strength and resilience that had sustained my family and our community for generations, a powerful rebuke to Evelyn's shallow obsession with status and wealth. And as I turned to face Mark, his eyes shining with a newfound understanding and respect, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the love and support of those who truly mattered, and the unbreakable spirit of community that had brought us to this moment. The reception was in full swing, the air thick with the mingled scents of expensive perfumes and the familiar aroma of freshly baked treats from the Harris Bakery. As I made my way through the crowd, exchanging warm embraces and heartfelt congratulations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and vindication wash over me. Despite Evelyn's best efforts to turn our wedding into a gaudy display of wealth and status, the genuine love and support of my community had shone through, overshadowing her hollow network of social climbers. Their presence was a tangible reminder of the true strength that lay in the bonds of family and community, bonds that transcended mere bloodlines and social standing. As I caught sight of Evelyn, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress, a stark contrast to the warmth and simplicity that surrounded her, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation. She had been uncharacteristically subdued during the ceremony, no doubt stung by Dad's powerful speech and the outpouring of affection from our guests. But I knew better than to expect her to retreat quietly into the night. Evelyn was a woman accustomed to getting her way, and she would not relinquish her grip on power and control without a fight. Sure enough, As I approached the head table, her eyes narrowed, and she rose to her feet, a hush falling over the room as she cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." I felt Mark tense beside me, his hand tightening around mine as we braced ourselves for the onslaught. "As many of you know, I have had my reservations about this union," Evelyn began, her voice dripping with disdain. "Not because I harbor any ill will toward Linda, of course, but because I fear she may not be suited for the lifestyle that comes with being part of our family." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I could feel the eyes of my community members burning into Evelyn, their silent support bolstering my resolve. "You see, the Bryant name carries with it a certain level of prestige, a certain expectation," Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "And while I'm sure Linda's humble upbringing has instilled in her a certain set of values, one can't help but wonder if she truly understands the responsibilities that come with our station." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Dad's every pore. But before he could respond, before the fury that had been simmering within me could boil over, a voice rang out from the crowd, clear, strong, and unwavering. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bryant," Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who had been a fixture at the bakery for as long as I could remember, stepped forward, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "It seems to me that you're the one who doesn't understand the true meaning of family and community." A hush fell over the room as Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knit together in confusion, her lips pursing ever so slightly. "Linda may not have been born into your world of wealth and privilege," Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice carrying a weight and authority that belied her years. "But she has something far more valuable, a deep appreciation for the bonds that truly matter, the ones forged through shared experiences, unwavering support, and a genuine love for the simple joys in life." One by one, the other members of our community stepped forward, their voices rising in a chorus of support, each sharing their own stories and memories of the warmth and kindness that Linda had brought into their lives. As the testimonials washed over me, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude swell within my chest. These were the people who had stood by me through thick and thin, who had seen me not just as a customer or a neighbor, but as a cherished member of their extended family. And as I turned to face Mark, his eyes shining with a newfound understanding and respect, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the love and support of those who truly mattered and the unbreakable spirit of community that had brought us to this moment. "Mother," Mark's voice rang out, clear and resolute, cutting through the din of the crowd. "I love you, and I will always be grateful for the opportunities you've provided me. But Linda is my wife, my partner, and my future. And if you cannot accept and respect that, then I'm afraid our paths must diverge." A collective gasp rippled through the room as Mark's words sank in, and I could see the color drain from Evelyn's face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. "From this day forward, I will be taking Linda's surname," Mark declared, his hand tightening around mine in a silent vow of solidarity. "And I will embrace the values and traditions that have sustained her family for generations, values that you, regrettably, seem to have lost sight of." In that moment, as Evelyn stood frozen in stunned silence, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The shackles of her toxic influence had been broken, and I was free to embrace the life I had always dreamed of. A life filled with love, laughter, and the unwavering support of a community that had become more than just neighbors, but a cherished extension of my family. The months following our wedding passed in a whirlwind of change and adjustment, but through it all, a sense of peace and contentment settled over our lives. With Evelyn's toxic influence finally banished, Mark and I were free to embrace the values and traditions that had sustained my family for generations. Gone were the days of walking on eggshells, constantly second-guessing ourselves to appease Evelyn's elitist whims. Instead, we found ourselves welcomed with open arms into the warm embrace of my community, their unwavering support and genuine affection a balm for the wounds inflicted by years of emotional turmoil. As we settled into our new life together, Mark threw himself wholeheartedly into the daily operations of the Harris Bakery, his natural affinity for numbers and business acumen proving invaluable as we explored ways to expand our reach and share our beloved treats with a wider audience. "You know, Linda," he mused one evening as we pored over the latest sales figures, a contented smile playing on his lips, "I never truly appreciated the magic of this place until now." I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering the disdain that had once clouded his perception, a byproduct of Evelyn's relentless pursuit of status and wealth. "Well, I'm just glad you finally saw the light." Mark's gaze softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand in his. "It's more than that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This bakery, this community, it's a living, breathing embodiment of everything that truly matters in life. Love, loyalty, and the simple joys that money can't buy." As the weeks turned into months, the news of Evelyn's public humiliation and Mark's defiant stance spread like wildfire through her elite social circles. One by one, her so-called friends and associates began to distance themselves, their shallow allegiances crumbling in the face of her tarnished reputation. Meanwhile, our little bakery thrived, buoyed by the unwavering support of our community and the influx of curious newcomers drawn in by the tantalizing aromas and the promise of a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Dad, ever the visionary, saw an opportunity to expand our reach even further, and with Mark's business savvy and my deep-rooted knowledge of the bakery's operations, we embarked on an ambitious plan to open a second location in the heart of the city. The grand opening was a true celebration of our journey, a testament to the resilience and determination that had carried us through the darkest of times. As the ribbon was cut and the doors swung open, a sea of familiar faces greeted us, their smiles and well wishes a poignant reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained us. In the years that followed, our little bakery empire continued to grow, each new location a beacon of hope and community in a world that often felt cold and impersonal. And through it all, Mark and I remained steadfast in our commitment to the values that had brought us together: hard work, loyalty, and an unwavering appreciation for the simple pleasures in life. As I watched Dad play with our children in the warm, golden light of the bakery's kitchen, their laughter mingling with the familiar scents of freshly baked bread and sugary confections, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. This was the life I had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, laughter, and the unwavering support of a community that had become more than just neighbors, but a cherished extension of our family. And in those quiet moments as the world outside faded into the background, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the strength and resilience that had carried us through the darkest of times and the enduring spirit of community that had become the very foundation of our lives. The moment I stepped through the front door, my heart sank. There stood Edna, my mother-in-law, with her suitcases packed and a smug look on her face. I knew this day would come, but I never expected it to be so soon. "Naomi, your worthless existence is over. Neil doesn't need a useless wife who claims to work. From now on, I'll take care of my son," Edna declared, her voice dripping with disdain. I felt the anger rising within me. "This is my home too, and I work hard every day, Edna. You can't just—" She cut me off, thrusting a stack of papers into my hands. "Don't lie. Sign these papers and leave while I make this place worthy of my family." My eyes widened as I realized what I was holding. Divorce papers, supposedly signed by Neil. The betrayal stung like 1,000 needles, piercing my heart. How could he do this to me after all these years? I looked up at Edna, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She had always resented me, viewing me as an obstacle to her son's success. Now she had finally found a way to get rid of me, but I refused to let her see me crumble. With a steady hand, I signed the papers, my signature a declaration of my resolve. I would not let this defeat me. I would start anew, free from the toxicity that had plagued my life for far too long. As I gathered my belongings, memories of happier times flooded my mind. Neil and I had once been so in love, supporting each other's dreams and ambitions. He had encouraged my freelance writing career, and I had been his rock as he pursued his own passions. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Neil's writing career stagnated, and he began to indulge his parents' delusions of grandeur. The loving husband I once knew had become a stranger, a mere puppet in his family's twisted play. I pushed the memories aside, focusing on the present. I had to find a new place to live, to rebuild my life on my own terms. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had the strength within me to overcome this challenge. As I stepped out of the house, I caught a glimpse of Edna's smug smile. She thought she had won, but little did she know that this was just the beginning of my journey. I would prove to her, to Neil, and to myself that I was more than just a useless wife. With each step, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it head-on. I had spent too many years living in the shadows of others' expectations. Now, it was time for me to reclaim my life and find the happiness I deserved. As I walked away from the house that had once been my home, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. But I knew that this was not the end, but rather the start of a new chapter. A chapter where I would be the author of my own story, free from the chains of the past. With a deep breath, I stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. This was my time to shine, and nothing, not even Edna's cruelty or Neil's betrayal, could stop me now. As I settled into the driver's seat of my car, the weight of the past few hours crashed down on me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I fought back the tears that threatened to spill. How had it come to this? How had the love Neil and I once shared turned into such a bitter, twisted mess? Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. I remembered the way Neil's eyes sparkled when he talked about his writing, the passion in his voice as he shared his dreams with me. I had been his biggest supporter, encouraging him to pursue his craft while I worked tirelessly to build my own freelance career. We had been a team, a partnership built on love and mutual respect. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Neil's writing career had stagnated, and he had become increasingly distant, spending more and more time trying to please his parents. I had tried to be understanding, to be supportive, but Edna's constant meddling and Neil's growing resentment had taken their toll. The once loving husband I knew had become a stranger, a shell of the man I had fallen in love with. As I drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Had I not been enough? Had I not loved him enough, supported him enough? But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about me. It was about Neil's inability to stand up to his parents, to assert himself, and fight for our marriage. He had chosen to indulge their delusions, to prioritize their expectations over our relationship. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had to move on, to find a new place to live and start over. I couldn't continue to live in a house where I was constantly belittled and undermined, where my own husband had betrayed me so deeply. I pulled into the parking lot of a local coffee shop, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. As I sat there, sipping on a steaming cup of coffee, I felt a newfound sense of determination wash over me. I would not let this defeat me. I would rise above the pain and the betrayal, and I would build a new life for myself. I pulled out my phone and started searching for apartments in the area. It wouldn't be easy, starting over at my age, but I knew I had the strength within me to do it. I had spent too many years living in the shadows of others' expectations. It was time for me to step into the light and reclaim my life. As I scrolled through the listings, a sense of excitement began to build within me. This was my chance to start fresh, to create a home that was truly my own. A place where I could be myself, free from the constant judgment and criticism of my in-laws. I knew there would be challenges ahead. I would have to face the reality of Neil's betrayal and the disdain of his family. But I was ready. I had spent too many years silently enduring their abuse, and I refused to do it any longer. With a newfound sense of purpose, I finished my coffee and headed back to the car. I had a lot of work ahead of me, but I was ready to face it head-on. This was my time to shine, to prove to myself and to the world that I was more than just a useless wife. As I drove away from the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I was ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead, to write the next chapter of my life on my own terms. The days following my departure from the house I once called home were a whirlwind of emotions. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove to myself and everyone else that I was more than just a useless wife. But even as I poured my heart and soul into my freelance projects, I couldn't escape the constant barrage of insults and passive-aggressive behavior from Edna and Neil. Every family gathering became a battlefield, with Edna taking every opportunity to publicly humiliate me. She would make snide comments about my work, my appearance, and my supposed lack of contribution to the family. Neil, ever the dutiful son, would sit silently by, never once coming to my defense. I remember one particularly painful incident at a family dinner. Edna had invited everyone over to celebrate Neil's supposed writing success, and I had reluctantly agreed to attend. As we sat around the table, Edna began to regale the family with tales of Neil's literary prowess, painting him as a rising star in the publishing world. I knew it was all a lie, but I bit my tongue, not wanting to cause a scene. But Edna wasn't content to simply praise her son. She turned to me, a cruel smile playing on her lips, and said, "And what about you, Naomi? What have you accomplished lately? Still playing at being a writer?" The table fell silent, and I felt all eyes on me. I wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth about Neil's failures and Edna's manipulation, but I remained stoically silent, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I excused myself from the table and stepped outside, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. It was in that moment that I realized I couldn't continue to live this way. I had to leave, to find a way out of this toxic environment before it destroyed me completely. Later that evening, I found myself confiding in my daughter, Clara. She had always been my rock, my confidante, and I knew I could trust her with my deepest fears and doubts. As we sat together on the couch, I poured out my heart to her, telling her about the constant insults, the passive-aggressive behavior, and the suffocating control Edna had over our lives. Clara listened patiently, her eyes filled with concern and love. When I finished, she took my hand in hers and said, "Mom, you deserve so much better than this. You are a strong, talented, and amazing woman, and you don't need to put up with their abuse any longer." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt, and I felt a sudden surge of clarity wash over me. She was right. I had spent too many years silently enduring their mistreatment, and it was time for me to take a stand. I had to value myself, to recognize my own worth, and to prepare for a life without Neil and his toxic family. With Clara's encouragement ringing in my ears, I began to make plans. I started secretly searching for apartments, determined to find a place where I could start fresh and rebuild my life on my own terms. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face the challenges head-on. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I knew that leaving Neil and his family would be painful, but I also knew that it was necessary. I had to prioritize my own well-being, to reclaim the respect and autonomy that had been stripped away from me for so long. With a newfound sense of purpose, I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where I was free from the chains of my past, ready to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. With newfound determination, I began to put my plan into action. I started covertly searching for apartments, scouring online listings, and making discreet calls to potential landlords. I knew I had to be careful, as any hint of my intentions would surely be met with swift retribution from Edna and Neil. As I searched, I also began to discreetly pack my belongings. I started with small, inconspicuous items. A few books here, a piece of jewelry there. I tucked them away in hidden corners of the house, slowly building a secret stash of my most treasured possessions. But even as I worked towards my escape, the tension at home continued to escalate. Neil, ever the dutiful son, seemed to be under increasing pressure from his parents to maintain the illusion of his success. He began to siphon money from our joint accounts, claiming it was for shared expenses, but I knew better. I remember one particularly heated argument we had over finances. I had confronted him about the missing money, demanding to know where it had gone. He had the audacity to look me in the eye and lie, claiming it was for a business investment that would pay off tenfold. I saw right through his deceit, and I felt a surge of anger course through my veins. How dare he continue to manipulate and deceive me, even as I was planning my escape from this toxic environment? But I refused to let my anger consume me. Instead, I channeled it into a quiet, steely resolve. I would not let Neil or his family break me. I would regain the respect and autonomy that had been stripped away from me, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to search for my new home in secret. I attended apartment viewings under the guise of running errands, always careful to cover my tracks. I knew that if Edna or Neil caught wind of my plans, they would stop at nothing to keep me under their control. Finally, after weeks of searching, I found the perfect place. It was a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the suffocating influence of my in-laws. I signed the lease with a sense of triumph, knowing that I was one step closer to my freedom. But even as I celebrated this small victory, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. I had to find a way to leave without triggering a prolonged fight with Edna and Neil. I knew they would not let me go easily, and I had to be strategic in my departure. That's when fate seemed to intervene. Edna, in her never-ending quest to control every aspect of our lives, began to pressure me to sign the divorce papers once again. She cornered me one evening, thrusting the papers in my face and demanding that I end this farce of a marriage once and for all. In that moment, I saw my opportunity. I agreed to sign the papers, but on one condition, that I be allowed to leave immediately, without any further interference from her or Neil. Edna, so eager to be rid of me, readily agreed. And so, with a sense of both relief and trepidation, I signed my name on the dotted line. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing that I was finally free from the legal bonds that had tied me to Neil and his family for so long. But even as I celebrated this small victory, I knew that the real challenge lay ahead. I had to gather my belongings and make my escape before Edna or Neil could change their minds. I had to be strong, to rely on the quiet strength that had sustained me through all these years of silent battles. With a deep breath, I began to pack my bags, ready to embark on the next chapter of my life. A chapter filled with uncertainty, yes, but also with the promise of a brighter future, free from the chains of my past. The day I moved into my new apartment was a day I will never forget. As I stepped over the threshold, a wave of relief washed over me, so powerful that it nearly brought me to my knees. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I took a moment to simply stand there, taking in my new surroundings. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Every inch of it represented a new beginning, a chance to start over and rebuild my life on my own terms. As I began to unpack my belongings, I felt a newfound burst of creativity coursing through my veins. Ideas for new writing projects flooded my mind, and I found myself itching to sit down at my desk and put pen to paper. It was as if the act of leaving behind the toxic environment of my old life had unlocked something within me, something that had been dormant for far too long. Over the next few days, I threw myself into my work with a passion I hadn't felt in years. I wrote for hours on end, pouring my heart and soul into every word. I took breaks only to eat, sleep, and occasionally chat with my new neighbor, Grace, who had quickly become a source of support and friendship. Grace was a kind, empathetic woman who seemed to understand the struggles I was going through without me even having to say a word. She would often invite me over for tea and conversation, and I found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with anyone before. As I settled into my new life, I began to rediscover the joy of living independently. I relished the freedom to make my own choices, to come and go as I pleased without fear of judgment or criticism. I took long walks in the park, explored new cafes and bookstores, and even started attending a weekly writing group at the local library. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living, rather than simply existing. I was no longer defined by my role as Neil's wife or Edna's punching bag. I was Naomi, a strong, capable woman with a bright future ahead of her. But even as I reveled in my newfound independence, I couldn't shake the feeling that the other shoe was about to drop. I had spent so many years living under the oppressive thumb of my in-laws that a part of me was still waiting for them to come barging back into my life, demanding that I return to my old ways. And then, 3 days into my fresh start, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be Clara, or perhaps a new client. But the voice on the other end of the line made my blood run cold. It was Neil, and he was in a panic. He spoke rapidly, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic jumble. From what I could gather, his family was in the midst of a financial crisis, and the carefully crafted facade of his success had come crashing down around them. I listened in stunned silence as he begged me to come back, to help him pick up the pieces of the life he had so carelessly shattered. But even as a part of me ached for the man I had once loved, I knew that I could never go back to that life. I had worked too hard, come too far, to let myself be dragged back into the darkness. With a heavy heart, I told Neil that I couldn't help him, that he needed to face the consequences of his actions on his own. And then, with a sense of finality, I hung up the phone, severing the last tie to my old life. As I sat there in the silence of my new apartment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but I also knew that I had the strength within me to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I was ready to embrace my new life, to chase my dreams, and build a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibility. The days following Neil's frantic phone call were a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to focus on my work, to lose myself in the joy of writing and the comfort of my new life, but his words kept echoing in my mind, refusing to be silenced. It wasn't until a week later that I learned the full extent of the crisis that had befallen my former family. Grace, my ever-vigilant neighbor, had heard through the grapevine that Neil's parents had lost everything. They had quit their jobs, believing in the fiction of their son's success, and now found themselves destitute and desperate. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for them, despite all the pain they had caused me over the years. To have your entire world come crashing down around you, to realize that the life you had built was nothing more than a house of cards. I couldn't imagine the devastation they must have felt. But even as I grappled with these conflicting emotions, the phone calls from Neil continued. Each time, his voice grew more desperate, more unhinged. He begged me to come back, to help him pick up the pieces of the life he had so carelessly shattered. "Naomi, they think I'm a successful writer," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "They won't stop until you come back." I felt my resolve wavering, the old habits of a lifetime threatening to pull me back into the darkness. But then I remembered all the pain and humiliation I had endured at the hands of Neil and his family, all the years I had spent silently suffering under their oppressive rule. "I won't be part of your lies anymore," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "You need to face the consequences of your actions." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the sound of Neil's ragged breathing. And then, with a click, the call disconnected, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. I wrote like a woman possessed, pouring all of my pain and anger and hope onto the page. I attended writing workshops and networking events, determined to build a new life for myself, one that was entirely my own. And slowly but surely I began to heal. The wounds of the past would always be with me, but they no longer defined me. I was no longer Naomi the victim, Naomi the punching bag. I was Naomi the survivor, Naomi the thriver. But even as I embraced this new chapter of my life, I couldn't help but wonder about Neil and his family. What had become of them in the wake of their own destruction? Had they found a way to pick up the pieces, to start anew? It wasn't until months later that I learned the truth. Grace, ever the gossip, had heard through a friend of a friend that Neil and his parents had moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. They were barely scraping by, their once proud lives reduced to a shambles. I felt a strange sense of vindication at the news, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But even as I reveled in this small victory, I knew that I could never truly take pleasure in their downfall. For me, the true revenge was in living well, in building a life that was entirely my own. And so, with a sense of peace and purpose, I cut off all ties to my old life, embracing the freedom and independence that I had fought so hard to achieve. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by the trappings of my new life, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over me. I had confronted the demons of my past and emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. And now, with the world at my feet and the future stretching out before me, I knew that anything was possible. As the months passed, I settled into my new life with a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't felt in years. My writing flourished, and I found myself surrounded by a growing circle of friends and colleagues who appreciated me for who I was, rather than what I could do for them. But even as I reveled in my newfound freedom, I couldn't help but wonder about Neil and his family. What had become of them in the wake of their own destruction? Had they found a way to rebuild their lives, or were they still struggling to pick up the pieces? It wasn't until I ran into Grace at the local market that I finally got some answers. She pulled me aside, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "You'll never guess what I heard," she whispered conspiratorially. "Apparently, Neil and his parents have moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of town. They're barely scraping by, and the whole neighborhood is talking about it." I felt a strange sense of vindication wash over me, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But even as I processed this news, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for them. "I heard that Edna and Tom are constantly fighting," Grace continued, her voice lowering even further. "And Neil, well, let's just say he's not handling the pressure very well." I nodded, unsurprised by this revelation. Neil had always been weak-willed, easily swayed by the opinions of others. It was no wonder that he was struggling to cope with the weight of his own lies. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking more and more about my former family. I couldn't help but wonder what they were going through, how they were coping with the reality of their own downfall. But even as I grappled with these conflicting emotions, I knew that I couldn't let myself get pulled back into their toxic orbit. I had worked too hard, come too far to let them drag me back down into the darkness. And so, with a sense of resolve, I made a conscious decision to focus on my own future, to pour all of my energy into building the life that I had always dreamed of. I threw myself into my writing, attending workshops and conferences, networking with other professionals in my field. Slowly but surely, my hard work began to pay off. My freelance business took off, and I found myself inundated with new clients and projects. I even started to gain recognition in my field, with my work being featured in prominent publications and online forums. But even as I celebrated these successes, I never lost sight of the lessons I had learned from my past. I knew that true happiness and fulfillment came not from external validation, but from a deep sense of self-worth and purpose. And so I continued to focus on my own growth and development, both personally and professionally. I traveled, explored new hobbies and interests, and surrounded myself with people who lifted me up and supported my dreams. As the years passed, I found myself looking back on my journey with a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had faced some of the darkest moments of my life, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. And while I knew that I would never forget the pain and betrayal of my past, I also knew that I had found a way to move forward, to build a life that was entirely my own. In the end, that was the true vindication, not in seeing Neil and his family suffer, but in knowing that I had triumphed over adversity, that I had found the strength and courage to create a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibility. And as I looked out over the horizon, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same resilience and determination that had brought me this far. For I was Naomi, a survivor, a thriver, and nothing could stop me now. As the years passed, I found myself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought me to this point. It had been a long and difficult road, filled with pain and heartache, but also with moments of incredible joy and self-discovery. I thought back to those early days when I had first met Neil and fallen head over heels in love. We had been so young then, so full of hope and promise. I had truly believed that we would spend the rest of our lives together, building a future filled with love and laughter. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and our marriage had slowly crumbled under the weight of Neil's lies and his family's toxic influence. I had spent years silently enduring their abuse, convinced that I was somehow to blame for their behavior. It wasn't until I found the strength to leave, to strike out on my own and build a new life, that I realized just how much I had been holding myself back. Freed from the chains of my past, I had flourished in ways I never thought possible. My writing career had taken off, and I found myself in demand as a freelance editor and consultant. I traveled the world, exploring new cultures and immersing myself in the beauty and diversity of life. But even as I celebrated these successes, I never lost sight of what truly mattered. My daughter, Clara, remained my rock, my constant source of love and support. And as she built her own family, I found myself cherishing every moment I could spend with her and my grandchildren. It was during one of these visits that I found myself reflecting on the true meaning of resilience. Clara and I were sitting in her backyard, watching her children play on the grass. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "You know, Mom," Clara said softly, turning to me with a smile, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've been through, and I just wanted to say how proud I am of you." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I reached out to take her hand in mine. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my strength, my guiding light through all of this." Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with love and admiration. "You give me too much credit," she said with a laugh. "You're the one who had the courage to leave, to start over and build a new life. That takes a special kind of strength, Mom. A strength that I hope I can pass on to my own children." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell in my chest. Clara was right. I had faced some of the darkest moments of my life, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. And that was a legacy worth passing on, a gift that I could give to my grandchildren and all the generations to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But I also knew that I had the strength within me to face them head-on, to keep moving forward no matter what life threw my way. And so as I sat there in the twilight, surrounded by the love and laughter of my family, I made a silent promise to myself. I would continue to live my life with resilience and self-worth, cherishing my autonomy and independence. I would be a role model for my grandchildren, showing them that it was never too late to start over, to build a life filled with purpose and meaning. For I was Naomi, a survivor, a thriver, and nothing could stop me now. I had conquered the trials of my past, and I was ready to embrace a future filled with endless possibility, anchored by the unshakable strength of my own resilience.